What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Primetime Sports Podcast, hosted by Joey Maylari. So today we'll be joined by Chris Cotillo, a Red Sox beat writer for MassLive.com. He's a returning guest. I would say this is probably his fourth or fifth time on my podcast, my radio show. It's an absolute pleasure, as always, being able to talk Red Sox baseball with him. We preview the Red Sox offseason and talk about who they could potentially get in free agency or via trade. We talk about the future of Masataka Yoshida, Jarren Duran, and Tristan Casas, as well as also mentioning the fact that Alex Bregman opted out, and also Trevor Story still has an opt-out as well for the upcoming season. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this episode. Thank you so much, as always, for taking the time to listen to this. I appreciate it. All right, here I am with Chris Cotillo, Red Sox beat writer from MassLive.com, returning guest to the podcast. Thank you so much, Chris, for your time. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Always good to talk to you, buddy. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. It's a pleasure being able to have your time here and talk some Red Sox. I'm sure things have been busy over the last couple months for you with the season ending, and then obviously now getting ready for the offseason. So I do appreciate your time. We'll talk about the Red Sox and what they're going to do this offseason. We'll start out with how this past season went, though. How would you grade this Red Sox 2025 season?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, right about where they expected to be. Kind of came true. They expected to be in the playoff mix. They were. They were a team that, won 89 games. I think that was the range everyone expected them in. They got the wild card series. They got some experience in the postseason, all that. Certain guys stepped up. Other guys didn't. I think the big takeaway for me is that, you don't have to dream on a playoff run anymore. It's a group that, got there. The core that's going to be there on the pitching side. Crochet, especially on the position player side, Anthony, there's obviously kind of complementary parts on both. But it's not like a reach to think, okay, could this team enter a competitive window? They're there, and they won 8 more games than they did a year ago. I think the testament to them and why you look back at this season as impressive is like it happened in a way that no one would have envisioned, right? Like you would have guessed that they would have gotten to this point that they did, but in a totally different way. You would have expected like Casas to be really good and Devers to have a really good year, obviously not get traded, and maybe Houck to step up and Durand, but like they had a lot of things go wrong. A lot of injuries, Anthony down the stretch, Meyer down the stretch, Houck early, Casas really early, Dobbins, a lot of banged up guys. Mix that with the Devers drama and catastrophe and having to deal him and getting nothing back that helped the major league team for him, and the fact that they were able to win 89 games. I think it's a group that the result was better than, the sum of the parts was greater than the parts themselves, or whatever the hell that phrase is. And that's, means that when they're at, full strength, I think expectations can be pretty high. And that starts, I think, with, number one, what Crochet gave them. They had a lot of guys have, while they were on the field, be really, really elite, if not for the entire year, then a stretch of it. Crochet was elite start to finish. Chapman was elite start to finish. When you have that as an ace and a closer, that raises the floor of a team a lot. Anthony did the same thing when he came up. Bregman did it for the first couple months. So I think if all guys are clicking at the same time, it's a really dangerous group going forward. I do think that they are in the start of this competitive window, whatever you want to call it. And, that's exciting for Red Sox fans in a way it hasn't been for a while.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. I think you summed it up great with, obviously, the guys that were great in 2024 just weren't the same in 2025. Obviously, with Houck going down with an injury, Durant kind of taking a slight step back, or probably more than a slight step back production-wise this year. And then you obviously mentioned some other guys like Dobbins got hurt. Cutter Crawford was another guy that was pretty good for them in 2024.
He led the team in innings in 24 and didn't throw one in 25. It's a big deal,
Exactly, 100%. So they had a lot obviously go wrong, but they did still make up for that. When you look at that Devers trade, the package I don't think was necessarily the best one they could get in return. They could have maybe gotten more, I thought. But when you look at that trade, just from the standpoint of did they make the right decision or not, do you think it was the best move to move on from them?
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's tough to – I hate doing this because it's like, you sound like that guy, but, you want to be the guy who shakes his fist and says, like, the people that weren't there every day don't know how bad it was. And, like, I don't think I even grasped fully how bad it was, but I could tell you that something was off. And in the words that Breslow and Kennedy used in the day after press conference, something was amiss. I mean, I can talk about, road trips in April or May where it was the tightest clubhouse and the tightest group, especially when they weren't playing well, like when they got to Detroit, that I've ever seen. Guys were, it was like the air was tight in there, and there was just this elephant in the room of, why is this guy not playing first base? There was, I think, a split camp. It really, doesn't matter 4 months later who was on what side. There were players who thought, Devers should take the team up on their offer to play first base and do it, and he should put the team first. So there were guys that were mad at Devers. Then there were a lot of guys that were mad at the team for screwing it up this badly and putting everybody in this position. Whatever it was, whether you blame the front office, whether you blame Devers, and I've said probably 5,000 times since May that you can blame both sides. Mm-hmm. Something was wrong. Something was amiss. And it felt like, as soon as he was dealt, it took them about a week to find their identity. But that, coupled with the fact Anthony came up right then, and then, about a week later really started hitting, really changed the season. And they were able to have a more athletic, more dynamic offense. Is Roman Anthony a better offensive player in 2025 than Rafael Devers? I think they're actually pretty close. Probably not when you look at the slug and the homers and stuff. But the way that the roster was able to be manipulated and moved, they actually were, better, and they were able to win more games like Breslow, predicted. And I think, the answer long-term to that question is the number one reason that trade got done, and the number one thing they accomplished in that deal was trading him, getting rid of him. He's not a horrible person. He's not a bad teammate necessarily. This was an ugly instance that it became untenable, point blank. Mm-hmm. Number two is just getting rid of the money. I don't think that's the primary motivation there, but I think it's, how this trade is going to be kind of analyzed down the road, because you have to go reallocate that, not at the 2025 trade deadline, but, you have room to go sign a Kyle Schwarber or a Pete Alonso or Framber Valdez, whoever you want now, that you wouldn't with Devers, on the books, or Bregman, whoever it is. And number three, I think way down the list is if you get anything out of the guys that you got back. Jordan Hicks is a no. James Tibbs is a no because they already traded him. So if you can turn Harrison into something, that's kind of a bonus. There's these trades are not, people look at it and see the motivation being who you get back for who you traded. The Mookie Betts trade that we've relitigated 1,000 times. Unfortunately, the main reason the Red Sox wanted to do that deal was to clear money. And so they did not get a good package back of the Dodgers' top guys. Mm-hmm. Verdugo's okay for a while. Wong's okay for a while. Downs was terrible. But, that's just sometimes the money, it's kind of that sliding scale people have to remember. Now it's their responsibility, in a way they didn't after the Mookie trade, to reallocate those funds now. And I think that's how that trade will be judged.
Mm-hmm. I think you said it all perfectly. And I'm happy you brought up the money factor of it, which it might not have been the main reason, but San Francisco taking on all that money definitely was an attractive thing on the side of the Red Sox. Now, when you look at this offseason, where the Red Sox currently stand, the first thing we'll start with is Trevor Story and Alex Bregman. Obviously, Bregman's already opted out. Story still has, until the end of the World Series, if I remember correctly, to opt out. But what do you think is going to happen with either one of those guys? What's the likelihood they're both back in Boston, or just one of them, or I guess neither of them? What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, I think at this point, the Sox are cautiously optimistic and pretty optimistic that Story will opt in. I think it could go either way. I think if he was a Boris client, he'd probably be pushed to opt out. I do think that there's probably part of Trevor Story that wants to keep the good vibes rolling here. He's a leader. He's established himself. He's already made one big organizational change once, 3 years ago, or 4 years ago, whenever it was. And also that he kind of owes the Red Sox in a way for sticking with him and, allowing him to get to this point where this is even a question. Bregman, I think, is going to opt out. That doesn't mean he can't re-sign, but I do think that the money and the offers he gets could get into the silly range, and he's not going to take a discount or a creative deal to come back here this time. I think it's going to be the highest bidder, years and dollars, and I think there's some teams that could get silly to do that beyond what makes sense for them and beyond what makes sense for the Red Sox. And, I always struggle with this because it's not our money, it's John Henry's money, so spend whatever. But when you spend it on one guy, it, kind of hampers your ability to do that on others. And I think that, people look at Bregman as this perfect player you should just extend a blank check to around here for some reason. I don't understand that, because he is going to be 32. He just missed 2 months because of injury, and he was not good when he came back. And maybe he rushed back, and we can applaud him for that. I think that, for some reason with this player, Red Sox fans and people who cover the team and everybody like drink the Kool-Aid pretty fast and don't see that there are negatives associated with it too. I wouldn't give him like 6 for 180 or 6 for 185 or whatever some of those projections are. And I think there's some teams that are looking for that piece to put them over the top. Seattle, to me, jumps out as a huge one. Kansas City's being rumored as a dark horse. Detroit, the Cubs. I mean, those teams could get silly. And if you're the Red Sox, like there's a point where you have to say, there's other fits for this roster that make more sense. That's obviously entrusting Meyer with probably third or going out and signing somebody else. I just think that, they're going to have to draw a line. It can't just be we're going to match and figure this out. That's not how they've operated really under Henry at all. And I don't think they make an exception for a guy that, like, he was an all-star, but he wasn't healthy for the last month and a half before the All-Star game. When he came back, he was a below-average player. Was it a bad year? Of course not. But it was really inflated by a really good April. And then the rest was what it was. The intangibles are real, but I don't know. I just think people are looking at it like, do whatever you can to bring him back. I don't see that. I think it's actually, not much forethought would go into that.
Yeah, I think you said it best. I think we all did drink the Kool-Aid and we're kind of very much whatever money he wants, give him. I think it's mainly because we got a big name and the Red Sox at free agency over the last few years really haven't gone out and gotten that necessarily big name. They got Crochet obviously in a trade, but they haven't gone out and gotten like a free agent to come to Boston like Alex Bregman's caliber with, the resume he had heading into Boston from, what he did in Houston. So I think that was part of it, but I think you're right. After returning from injury, only hit .250 in his last 63 games, 724 OPS, just 7 home runs. He wasn't all-star, but that's obviously because what he did early on in the season before injury, and then once he came back, wasn't the exact same player. When you look at this free agency market, though, let's say Bregman either stays or he leaves. There's obviously other guys that are out there. What are the chances you see the Red Sox go out and get Kyle Schwarber, Pete Alonso? My guy, I want Kyle Tucker, which is very much unlikely, but especially with the outfield that we have now. But what's the likelihood they go out and get a big-time free agent? Let's say Alonso or Schwarber, since those would be probably the more likely to than Tucker.
Yeah, what I've been saying on this, I think Schwarber's a perfect fit, but it would be an all-in move in terms of like you'd have to dedicate $50 million to your DH spot because you'd have to basically move Yoshida and take on all that money or DFA him, which I think they should, and also then just sign Schwarber for $30 a year. So you're sinking $50 million into that DH spot, which is a ton, obviously, and just have him there and figure out the rest of your roster around that. To me, makes sense. If Alonso's hell bent on playing first for a team that wants to get a lot better defensively, he's as bad as it gets over there, and so the bat plays, the glove does not. And so if a team's willing to let him play first base, and that's something he wants to do, then let him go there. And I wouldn't do that if I'm the Red Sox. But, what's interesting, I think, in this whole conversation is, like, if you re-sign Bregman, I still think you need, like, Schwarber. So, but if Bregman leaves, then you're now down, you're short 2 guys. So I think we saw in the playoffs, obviously, without Anthony, the lineup, gets short quickly, and you just go around and look at who they have. First base is a question mark. Second base has been a question mark since you were in elementary school. Shortstop, Story, streaky. Third, Bregman wasn't at 100%. Narvaez broke down by the end of the year behind the plate. Abreu was streaky and not 100%. Duran was super streaky, and Rafaela can't make contact a lot of the time when he needs to. So I think there's a lot of holes in the lineup, more than people, I think, believe. I think that, weirdly, for the first time in a long time, the pitching staff's in a better spot heading into the offseason, and the focus really needs to be on, impact bats, more contact, less strikeouts. If you need trades to get you there, then do that too.
I think you just said it best, too. The pitching, obviously, is not necessarily the issue, and that's not been the case, right? For a few years, it was the bullpen was a problem at one point. Starting pitching, injuries, that was kind of the whole dilemma, or even with Chris Sale when he was a Red Sox, was just health, being on the mound, and then obviously not really having guys around that could step up when he was down. But the Red Sox have found a way, obviously, to try to clear that up, and getting Crochet was obviously part of that. The Red Sox fan base, everyone wants Joe Ryan. That seems like the consensus. Everybody wants to go out and trade for him. I'll ask you 2 questions about that. What's the likelihood you would see the Red Sox go and trade for Joe Ryan? And then what's the trade package it would cost to go get him?
Yeah, I mean, with Joe Ryan, it's like, this is kind of so obvious, and he's so, clearly the guy that they are targeting. Usually when it's so obvious and there's so much talk about it, it doesn't bear out that way. We've seen that so many times over time where it's like, oh, well, they're linked to this guy, so it must be him, must be him, must be him, and it ends up being, someone else, some wild card guy that we did not anticipate or didn't think would be here or whatever. So, the thing about Joe Ryan, there's going to be other teams in on him too. And there's going to be other teams that, that maybe have not had the same level of interest in the past. I think, for me, the fact that they flirted, so hard at the deadline doesn't really mean much when it comes to, what's going to get done here in the next few months. They clearly were not close on assigning value to this player. The Red Sox thought they had a pretty good package, and the Twins did not. So I think that he's a guy, but there's a lot of guys. Zach Gallen is a guy I went to college with, so it would be cool to have him cover him. But he's a guy that I think they could look at. I think Valdez, obviously, some of these other guys who are more ace types. Skubal's obviously the white whale. I don't know if they have the ammo to do that for a second straight off season, but there are actually a lot of options, especially trade market. Alcantara, Green, Gore, Abbott, Peralta in Milwaukee. So I think they'll get one of those guys. The line I've been using now for a couple weeks is BTB, better than Bayo. They need someone number 2 who's better than him because, I understand he took a step forward this year. I understand he has all the talent in the world. I understand he's good. And I'll give you that. But a true number 2, like in the mold of like what Schilling was behind Pedro and what some of these guys were throughout the years, gets more than 28 pitches in a playoff game, And I think that just shows you maybe, you can't say the Yankees are a bad matchup because he's carved them up for 4 years. Like, that's just, to me, said a lot about, like, they like him, but I don't know if they love him. And they need a guy that they love in that number 2 spot.
Mm-hmm. And Joe Ryan could maybe, fit that, mold right there and step in. What do you think the package would be for the Red Sox if they were to go out and trade for him?
Yeah, I think, one of the issues that they face now is that Connolly Early is really good September, made him a guy that every team in the league is going to want. And, I'd throw Tolley in that bucket a little bit. Obviously, he had some struggles. I think he's got the higher ceiling, the better stuff. Early's floor is higher, and he's, proven that. I think he's ready now. Tolley's less of a finished product, but he has a year less of pro experience, so that makes sense. I think all these teams are going to want Early. For so long, it's the Red Sox have all these position players to go trade for a pitcher, and they did, last year with Teal and Braden Montgomery and Mydroth. Now it's, like people are going to want out of this pitching group, whether it be Early and Tolley, or you look at a guy like Dobbins, or, a guy in, Fitz, I think his value is a little lower, but Harrison, if a team likes him, must be blowing up the whole Devers trade within a year. But, I mean, that's the guys you're going to look at, and I think, teams are going to probably understand that Anthony's off limits, but still ask for him at the beginning, which is funny. And then, you get into the more realistic asks where, you get into, would the Red Sox trade Meyer? I don't think so, but maybe. Would they trade Campbell with his value low? Probably not. Casas' value is low? Probably not. So to me, like, the trade that makes the most sense on paper is one of the outfielders like Duran or Abreu or Rafaela and Early to headline a package. That's kind of a lot, right? So, for 2 years of a guy, is it worth it? I don't know. I also, think that kind of the days of like you dreaming on a single A prospect to trade, that's just not realistic to get really, really good players now. We saw, Teal and Wickelman, Gonzalez and Mydroth all play for the White Sox this year. And Montgomery, is obviously behind those guys, but really talented too. So that's the package you have to give up for Crochet. I think it'd probably be, something, similar to that. And the Red Sox, I think, now that it's a lot more pitching in the system and major league ready pitching, are probably going to have to pay the price on that. And that is the sliding scale Breslin has to decide on, right? Like, does he go and get Joe Ryan for 2 years, or, a guy for 1 year where it's cheaper, or, a worse starter where you get an extra year? There's all those different considerations that have to go into it. But it's a clear need. There's also just a chance they go out and give a boatload of money to like Dylan Cease or Michael King or, one of those guys and say, you're our number 2. And that's that. and you don't have to trade prospects then. But could go either way, as always.
Yeah, I think you made the excellent point there too, where the Red Sox obviously want a number two, but I don't know if they're going to break the bank and trade a guy like Connolly early and Jarren Duran or Willie Abreu in a trade. I'll ask you one last thing about the Red Sox, maybe two last questions, and then just a second on the Patriots. But you look at the Red Sox right now. Jarren Duran is a big question mark about. Willie Abreu, there's somewhat of a question mark about. Masataka Yoshida. It seems like you expect Yoshida to be gone, but as for Duran and Abreu, what percent chances, so what's the likelihood you see either one of those guys or both of them back in Boston, since there's obviously trade, questions around each of them?
Yeah, I mean, I think, for me, first, two things on that. Number one, I wouldn't rule out trading Rafael either, because I think that skill set intrigues some teams. And, to me, if you like Duran a lot, then you can move him to center where he plays better than he plays in left, have Anthony in left, Abreu in right, still a very good outfield. And you get some swing and miss out of your lineup. I think, offensively, you get the best 3 out of 4 there. To me, yes, they're all left-handed, but that's why you have Ref Snyder on the roster. That's why you have the pass forward as a right-handed power bat who can play as well. I think, Ref Snyder's not on the roster right now, but I think they'll probably re-sign him or will try to. So, I wouldn't rule out the Rafaela part of that either. I also think that there's a chance that they, if they don't go out and get Schwarber or Alonso or one of those guys, that they will go and trade. Or they could keep all 4 of them and have one of them be the DH and move on from Yoshida. It was kind of we don't really need to make anything up to see how that could play out. You look at once Devers was gone and they had and Abreu came back and they had too many outfielders, someone's going to sit. That happened for like 4 days where Duran would have a day off or Abreu would have a day off and someone would DH and then someone got hurt. That happens every time. And if we have if the Red Sox have too many outfielders, then why was Nate Eaton playing right field in a playoff game? Depth is needed and attrition happens and all that type of stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's an excellent point. Yeah, Nate Eaton was playing, but he was a good contact hitter. I think that's something the Red Sox, like you said, are going to try to target is guys that can put the ball in play, obviously, and have less swing and miss rate, which Rafael has obviously been tough with that. When he does make contact, especially his hot streak, he was great, but he had a lot of swings and misses. How much of a pipe dream is it in your eyes, Kyle Tucker? I think it's probably a big one. I'd expect he's probably not going to be on the Red Sox radar considering how many outfielders they have now, but in the event the Sox got rid of Abreu and Duran, could you ever see them going out and getting him?
I mean, I think they get a Kyle Tucker at home and Anthony, if he becomes everything that they imagine him to be. And at that point, I just think there's other areas of the roster you need more. So, great player, just doesn't fit. For a guy like Soto, who's generational, capital G generational, maybe you extend and your roster gets all screwy. But for Tucker, I just wouldn't do it.
Mm-hmm. Fair point. So what would you say the Red Sox offseason right now, your main prediction, one guy you think they go get, or if they re-sign it, I guess it's an easy way out because we expect Story to be back. But of, let's say, Bregman and some of the other guys we mentioned, Alonso, Joe Ryan,
I'm all in on Schwarber, so I don't know. I think, you have to outbid Dave Dombrowski, which is always tough. But I just think it makes so much sense, And, Sean McAdam wrote about this for us over the weekend. It's just a guy that just makes sense. We know will fit here. I enjoyed covering him. I know he's going to be a fit here if he comes back. He just fits the roster. He kind of puts you over the top, in my mind. With or without Bregman, that's the thing. You don't need to, he's kind of a separate category. Just go and pay the guy, bring him in, have him match 50 homers, change your lineup, and then have that be that. That to me, I think that's the guy.
And what do you think his contract would be if the Sox did go out and pay him? Is it 3 or 4 year deal over $100 million roughly, or?
Yeah, probably 4 for 125 or something like that. Mm-hmm. But I mean, the floor is super high. He doesn't slump. He hits the shit out of the ball. Pretty simple.
Yeah, and he's obviously a guy that the Red Sox had success with when he was here for a very short amount of time. One question I want to ask before I switch over to Patriots really quick about baseball. A big thing around baseball right now is everybody talking about, are the Dodgers bad for baseball? What's your opinion on that and the way things have gone with them spending now over $500 million between their total payroll and the luxury tax?
Yeah, I mean, look, you can talk about them being bad for baseball and all that stuff. They still acquired this Will Klein guy, whatever the hell his name is, for Joe Jakes, who was in the Red Sox system last year, and turned him into a guy who gave him 4 innings in the biggest game of the year out of nowhere. So, you have to get performances from guys like that. Tommy Edman, you look back to some of the guys that started this dynasty for them. Max Muncy, who's still there, was a waiver claim from Oakland or whatever. Mm-hmm. Chris Taylor was a cast-off. Even a guy like Kike, they get the most out of those types of guys too. And, like they've had big guys step up and turn into stars. They've just paid guys. I mean, it's a good mix. And I also think their player development, I don't know if you went to school with Sheehan or knew him at all, but like a guy like that, like he comes up and can pitch. And, they obviously have Will Smith and different guys that are, like totally homegrown. So, the fact that, I remember a year ago we were talking about the Red Sox trying to get all these guys and bullpen guys, and the Dodgers getting Tanner Scott and Kirby Yates, and they're never going to lose a game. Well, those guys aren't on the World Series roster, and they got Will Klein. I don't even know if that's his correct name.
It's
I think
Will
it
Klein.
is. But,
you got
okay.
it.
I mean, but I hadn't heard of him before 3 a.m. this morning. So, but that's the impressive part to me. It's not a guarantee. We've seen that. If it was, they would have been winning the World Series every year. Look at the Mets do the same thing, and they miss. So, I mean, there's a combo here, and every team can do it. There's nothing blocking John Henry from doing it, so he should.
Yeah, I think the best way to put it is, in my opinion, which you just said, is every team can spend, and whether or not they're dedicated to spending as much as the Dodgers do, I think that's a question mark, right? They're the only team besides really the Mets, the Padres, the Red Sox have spent, obviously, historically, definitely, but really over the last 3 years, it's really just been kind of the Mets, the Yankees, and the Dodgers spending, that top tier money. But they develop talent very well, like you said. They draft very well, and they're a destination that players want to go to, right? You see free agents go there, right? Shohei Ohtani, Yoshinobu Yamamoto, Blake Snell. Like, guys want to go there. They traded for Glass now, and obviously they got, Sasaki as an international signing with the minor league contract, which ended up being, a steal for them. I know he didn't work out right away, but obviously in the playoffs he's been good for them out of the bullpen. But this is a destination people want to go. So you can't fault players for wanting to be a Dodger and have a chance to win and be in a place to succeed. Anyways, that'll wrap up this episode. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to listen to this. And thank you so much, Chris, for your time. Much appreciated as always, my friend.
Of course, man. Thank you.